Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I am flying solo this week, so I will be delivering both the Washington Report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate will both return today. The House will stay in session through Thursday, while the Senate will stay in session through Friday. A note on the composition of the Senate. Last week, Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance, the Vice President-elect, resigned his seat in the Senate to prepare for his inauguration as Vice President next week. In doing so, he reduced the number of Republican senators from 52 to 51. That was rectified today when now former West Virginia Governor Jim Justice was sworn into the seat he won in November. He didn't want to resign his position as governor to be sworn in with the rest of his class on January 3rd, and his term did not end until today. Back to Ohio. Governor Mike DeWine will choose Vance's successor in the Senate. That successor will hold the seat at least until a special election can be held. Under Ohio law, that special election cannot be held earlier than November 2026. So whoever DeWine chooses will serve for about 2 years. If that successor decides to run in the special election in 2026, the successor could win that election and hold the seat for the remainder of the term, another 2 years. The seat will be back on its regular schedule for elections in 2028. So DeWine will be taking that into consideration. Unless he deliberately picks a caretaker who's not planning to run to hold the seat, the successor DeWine chooses will have to be prepared to run statewide in back-to-back elections in 2026 and then again in 2028. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is about to be faced with the same choice because Florida Senator Marco Rubio is about to resign his seat in the Senate to assume the duties of Secretary of State. In fact, his confirmation vote may even take place a week from today, on the afternoon of Monday, January 20, when President Trump will be in position to officially nominate him for the new post. That will once again reduce the number of GOP senators until DeSantis chooses a 2-year replacement for Rubio. That successor will be on the same timeline as Vance's successor in Ohio. Whoever it is will serve for 2 years, then have to run for the remaining 2 years of the term, and then have to run again in 2028 if he or she wants to hold the seat. This week in the House will come back today with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to take up 7 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, and for the remainder of the week, the House is scheduled to consider 3 bills pursuant to a rule. H.R. 28, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act of 2025. H.R. 33, the United States-Taiwan Expedited Double Tax Relief Act, and H.R. 30, the Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. This week in the Senate will come back today with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the motion to proceed to S5, the Lake and Riley Act. Then, if the motion passes, as I expect it will, the Senate will spend the next several days dealing with proposed amendments to the bill. Now let's talk about border security and illegal immigration. The good guys won the first legislative skirmish of the new Congress last week when the House took up and passed H.R. 29, the Lake and Riley Act. That's a bill that would require immigration and customs enforcement to detain illegal immigrants accused of theft or burglary, and which would allow state attorneys general to sue the federal government if they can prove harms as a result of the federal government's failure to enforce immigration law. The vote to pass the bill was 264 to 159, with 48 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the majority. That's 11 more Democrats than voted for the bill last year, and it generated some momentum for the bill midweek. The attention then shifted to the Senate, where a companion bill, S5, had been introduced by Alabama Republican Senator Katie Britt. One Democrat became an original co-sponsor, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. Then, as the week progressed, other Democrats began to make it known that they, too, would vote for the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed. let's take a moment to talk procedure, because some of this terminology can be confusing. I found myself being interviewed on a radio show last week explaining that the vote to end debate was actually a vote to begin debate, and it occurred to me that we should discuss that for just a bit. So, first, a definition, cloture. Over the years, you've heard me say there's a motion to invoke cloture. For our purposes, that simply means end debate. A motion to invoke cloture is a motion to end debate. You may read the Constitution from start to finish, and you will not find the word cloture. It is not in the Constitution. It is not something that was even contemplated by the founders. Remember, in the original constitutional structure, the Senate was a body meant to represent the interests of the states as sovereign entities, with members chosen by the members of the individual state legislatures, not popularly elected, sent to the nation's capital for the purpose of representing the states as sovereign entities. From the beginning, the Senate was the place where debates could and did go on forever. The idea of shutting down debate while a member wanted to continue talking was anathema. It wasn't until World War I, more than a century and a quarter after the founding of the Republic, that the leaders of the Senate decided it was appropriate to find a way to allow the body to end a debate over the objection of a member who wanted to keep talking. And when they did so, they set the bar high. A motion to invoke cloture required support from 2/3 of the body. It wasn't until the mid-1970s that the Senate reduced the cloture threshold to 3/5, 60 senators. And that's where the threshold has been for the last 50 years. Now, let's talk procedure. Before a bill can be debated on the floor of the Senate, the rules require that, unless there is unanimous consent to dispense with the rules, the Senate first must vote to begin that debate. The measure that allows the Senate to begin debate on a bill is called a motion to proceed. And believe it or not, the Senate debates the motion to proceed, too. That is, they debate whether or not they actually want to debate. So, on Thursday of last week, the Senate voted on a motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S5. In other words, the Senate was going to vote on whether or not to end debate and move to a vote on the motion to proceed. And here's another tricky part of the Senate rule structure. When cloture is invoked, an alarm clock begins ticking. That alarm clock rings 30 hours after cloture is invoked. So when the Senate votes to invoke cloture, that is to end debate, debate actually continues for another 30 hours. But because now there's a time certain for the debate to end, everyone's happy. They can make plans, and they know that eventually they'll get to vote on the underlying measure. But it can take a while. First, there's the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to the bill. That motion is subject to filibuster, which means it needs a 3/5 vote to pass. Say it passes. Then the Senate launches into 30 hours of post-cloture debate on the motion to proceed, which usually becomes 30 hours of post-cloture debate on the underlying bill. Then there's the vote on the motion to proceed. That vote requires a simple majority, so it almost always passes. But then there's the debate on the underlying bill, and when that's done, there's a vote to invoke cloture on the debate over the bill. That requires 60 votes again, so that's another opportunity for the minority party to make its influence known by filibustering the measure. If cloture is invoked on the underlying bill, then the 30-hour post-cloture debate clock begins ticking again. And then, 30 hours later, the Senate can hold a vote on the underlying bill, final passage. And that vote requires a simple majority to pass. That is why it takes so long to move a bill through the Senate. Even if everything is lined up for it and there are 60 votes to support it, it still takes time to go through all the required steps. So, on Thursday of last week, the Senate began by voting 85-11 to invoke cloture, to end debate, on the motion to proceed to S5, the Lake and Riley Act. That set up a vote today on the motion to proceed, because that only requires a simple majority, and there will be 52 Republican senators in the chamber today. That should pass with no problem. Then we'll begin debate on the Senate floor, and this will be an opportunity for Senate Democrats to offer amendments to force Republicans into voting for things they'd rather not vote on. Those amendments, by the way, will come at a simple majority threshold. If a majority of the senators casting votes agrees to any individual amendment, it gets added to the underlying measure. After a few days of considering amendments, the Senate will move under the majority leader's direction to a vote to end debate on the bill. Now we'll be back up to the 60-vote threshold, and this will be the tough vote because Republicans will have to find 8 Democrats willing to join them to bring debate to an end. If the motion to end debate and move to final passage passes, with 60 votes or more, we'll be looking at a final passage vote either late in this week or first thing next week. But Majority Leader Thune will want to wrap this up this week so the bill can be ready for President Trump when he gets back from the Capitol after his swearing-in ceremony a week from today. Now let's talk about cabinet confirmations. The Senate cannot vote to confirm a cabinet nominee until he or she has been formally nominated for the position. And no one can be formally nominated for a position in the cabinet until the president is sworn in. So no one has actually been nominated at this point. That won't happen until next week when President Trump is sworn in and starts signing paperwork. But that doesn't mean they can't hold confirmation hearings on the announced cabinet nominees. So this week, the Senate is going to be very busy with confirmation hearings. On Tuesday, the Armed Services Committee will hold its hearing for Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. The Energy and Natural Resources Committee will hold its hearing for Interior Secretary nominee Doug Burgum. And the Veterans Affairs Committee will hold its hearing for Veterans Affairs Secretary nominee Doug Collins. On Wednesday, 7 committees will hold 8 confirmation hearings. The Judiciary Committee will hold its hearing for Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi. The Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee will hold its hearing for Agriculture Secretary nominee Brooke Rollins. The Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee will hold its hearing for Transportation Secretary nominee Sean Duffy. The Energy and Natural Resources Committee will hold its hearing for Energy Secretary Chris Wright. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee will hold its hearing for Homeland Security Secretary nominee Kristi Noem in the morning of Wednesday, and will hold its hearing Wednesday afternoon for OMB Director nominee Russell Vogt. The Intelligence Committee will hold its hearing for CIA Director nominee John Ratcliffe, and the Foreign Relations Committee will hold its hearing for Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio. On Thursday, the Finance Committee will hold its hearing for Treasury Secretary-designate Scott Bennett, and the Banking and Housing and Urban Development Committee will hold its hearing for Housing and Urban Development Secretary-designate Scott Turner. At least that's what the media was reporting as of the weekend. But there may be a hitch with Brooke Rollins' confirmation hearing, so that may not take place Wednesday after all. We'll see. At this point, FBI Director nominee Kash Patel and Director of National Intelligence nominee Tulsi Gabbard have not had their hearings scheduled. Now let's talk about the reconciliation strategy. As President Trump's second inauguration approaches, we're getting down to brass tacks on the strategy for the reconciliation bill. A brief recap. Reconciliation is the process that allows a majority of the Senate to bypass the Senate filibuster and pass a bill by a simple majority vote. Practically, it's only used when one party controls the White House, the Senate, and the House. That's happened in the first 2 years of the first term of every president elected in this century. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden all got to use the reconciliation process to bypass political opposition in the Senate and enact legislation by simple majorities in both houses. But each president only got to use it in the first 2 years of their first term, and each president only succeeded in passing one reconciliation bill. In order to use the reconciliation process, the House and Senate must start by first passing an identical budget resolution. Without that, the process doesn't work. So, leaders of both House and Senate have to be on the same page, pushing the same strategy to start the process. And that's why the discussions that have been going on since the election are so gosh darn important. Are they going to try to jam everything into one big, beautiful bill, as President Trump calls it? Or will they get hung up and have to split the pile into two? Here's what the leaders are trying to get into the package. Border security measures, which have been costed out at about $85 billion. Energy production measures. Defense spending increases. An extension of the 2017 tax cuts to prevent them from expiring at the end of the year and hitting 62% of American households with a tax hike. Cutting taxes further, like the no tax on tips promise and the no tax on Social Security benefits promise that President Trump made on the campaign trail. An increase in the state and local tax deduction for the GOP members from blue states, where the property taxes in particular are very high and where losing the ability to deduct most of those taxes from your federal income tax return was a huge hit. And an increase in the debt ceiling. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, when you raise the debt limit under the reconciliation process, you can only raise the debt limit by a dollar amount and not suspend it, as politicians these days have been preferring to do. That is an awful lot of stuff to put into one bill. Now, add to that the fact that many of the Republicans in the House have never voted for an increase in the debt ceiling. And now add to that the fact that many of the Republicans in the House want the bill to be deficit neutral. That is, they want to pay for it all with cuts in spending in other places. That is a tall, tall order. That is the Dikembe Mutombo of orders. And because the GOP majorities in the two houses are as slim as they are, what will effectively be just 2 votes in the House and just 3 votes in the Senate, the leaders in both houses have to get every single Republican to agree to vote for the bill. If even one Republican goes off the reservation or refuses to vote for the package for any reason, the whole structure could come tumbling down. So, President Trump invited a bunch of members of the House to spend time with him at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend. He hosted a dinner Friday evening for the members of the House Freedom Caucus. Then, on Saturday, he met with Republicans from blue states, California, New York, New Jersey, to discuss how to satisfy their concerns over restoring at least some of the lost SALT deductions. They came away from the meeting with Trump feeling good, saying he had asked them to give him a number, an indication in their eyes that he's open to addressing their concerns. Then, for dinner Saturday night, Trump hosted House committee chairs. And then on Sunday evening, Trump hosted a dinner for the members of the more moderate Main Street caucus. Do not underestimate how difficult this is going to be, especially with the slim majorities in both houses. Stay tuned. Now to Joe Biden's Title IX reforms being struck down. On Thursday, a federal district judge in Kentucky ruled that President Biden's changes to Title IX regulations meant, according to the administration, to provide new protections for transgender students, were an overreach. Consequently, he struck down that new rule. When the rule was first launched in August, dozens of states sued. So many, in fact, that the rule only went into effect in 24 states while the court cases played out. Judge Danny Reeves ruled that the regulation was unlawful because it was arbitrary and capricious, and that it violates both the spending clause and the free speech protections of the First Amendment. This week, following up on one of President Trump's campaign promises, the House will consider H.R. 28, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. Now to the latest on the Department of Government Efficiency. According to the New York Times, Elon Musk has recruited a team of executives from Silicon Valley tech outfits who will come in and act as volunteer advisors at the top levels of virtually every cabinet department in the government. Eventually, 2 volunteers will be assigned to each agency. They've been told to expect to work 80 hours per week for the next 6 months for free, which caused many originally interested executives to pass. The Doge itself will not be incorporated as a new entity, but will exist as an informal group of advisors connected on joint group chats. In an interview last week with Mark Penn, Musk said he thought if they tried to achieve $2 trillion in savings, they might get to $1 trillion. Now to the latest on lawfare against President Trump. Last Tuesday night, special counsel Jack Smith transmitted his final 2-volume report to Attorney General Merrick Garland. The first volume of the report details Smith's evidence that President Trump tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The second volume of the report details Smith's case regarding Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents after he left the White House and his alleged obstruction of the government's attempts to recover the documents at issue. The release of the final report is unnecessary because Smith has already laid out his evidence against Trump in the 2 indictments he filed in Florida and in Washington, D.C. Consequently, media reports that point out that Trump himself lauded the release of the final report by special counsel Robert Hur, who investigated President Biden's mishandling of classified information over a period of decades, totally missed the point. Hur did not indict Biden and so never revealed any of the evidence accumulated against Biden. The 2 situations are exactly the opposite. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. Please visit the front page of our website, teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org. to sign up to support President Trump's nominees and his agenda. You can find a form right there on the front page and use it to join our team of patriots committed to defending individual liberty, shrinking the size and scope of government, and enacting the Make America Great Again agenda. This week in particular, we'd like to focus on calling every member of the United States Senate to urge them to vote yes for the confirmation of Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense. He's a veteran who served with distinction in Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and he knows what to do to take care of our veterans, and he knows what to do about the armed services recruitment crisis. So, please call your 2 United States senators and urge them to vote to confirm Pete Hegseth. Thanks. We will not see you next week because at this time next week, we'll be watching Donald Trump take the oath of office, and then we'll be watching Donald Trump's inaugural parade. So, we will not be back with you for 2 weeks. We'll be back to you in 2 weeks on Monday, January 27th. Until then, be well and be active.